Thank you. I got to apologize for my poor French. I had one semester in college and a French girlfriend, and between my instructor and her, she said, if you ever go to France, speak English. For those who don't know me, I live in a small town in Texas. I'm a technology evangelist for Percona. I've written a book on using MySQL and JSON. I have another one on MySQL indexes I'm working on. And let's see if my little thing. I'm from a small town called Justin, Texas, which ironically was founded by some French gentlemen in 1840. They walked into a drought and a land swindle, which is pretty par for Texas. So the challenges of running big data or running data on Kubernetes, there's a lot. Kubernetes is built around containers that are supposed to be ephemeral, short-lived, and die. You don't want your databases to do that. You want your data to be around. And right while I was writing this slide deck, the Data on Kubernetes folks came out with a report, which hopefully you can download. It's interesting reading. Their key findings were that data on Kubernetes has had a big impact on the organizations who've made the leap to Kubernetes already. Most of them say that they're getting at least 10% of their revenue from running data on Kubernetes, which I've found surprising. And a third of the organization saw their productivity increase twofold. In the database world, if you can get 10%, you're happy. So that's big. Now, most respondents found a lot of satisfaction. However, after getting it running, the continuing operations was a big challenge. Kubernetes operators are better than they were a year ago, but they still have a lot of engineering needed until they become as dumb as we need them to be, or as dumb as we are to help to us. The big problem that a lot of folks were looking at is security. There's still a lot of fear out there that you put your stuff up on the cloud and you wake up the next day and your data's gone, or it's on the front page of the New York Times or some other catastrophe. The other problem that they're finding is talent. I used to be the certification person for MySQL AB and Sun Microsystems and for a while at Oracle. And I used to get a lot of calls from folks looking for qualified MySQL DBAs. It's hard to find qualified MySQL DBAs. It's impossible to find Postgres DBAs. That's how the gentleman Postgres should. And now with everything moving onto the cloud, it's hard to find talented folks that know everything. So it helps if you can start looking for the qualified talent early, because you will need them. Other big problem we're having with Kubernetes is the lack of existing tools. We've been using Microsoft Office for, 30 years? So we know how everything works with Microsoft Office. If you haven't been working with one of the MySQL Kubernetes operators for 2 years, you only had a year in there, you're still ahead of the curve for most people. So a lot of the stuff we're used to doesn't quite tailor to Kubernetes yet. Once again, lack of qualified talent. Also, most people are complaining that there's still too much time and effort to manage all this. The idea with Kubernetes is you have a developer who has another project, clicks a button here, gets a web server, clicks another button, gets the database, clicks the third button, gets high availability, and it's all very simple. We're not there yet. That's still too much of a hands-on process. I combine these two. The open source features of Kubernetes are not mature enough. They've come a long way in the past 18 months, but they're still not as reliable and as simple as we need. Now, the good news here is a lot of the commercial offerings that are out there aren't that much ahead of the open source offerings, if they're ahead at all. Also, a lot of the vendor solutions solve one or two problems, not a broad spectrum of the stuff that we need to get done. The other thing is, once you move some of your stuff into the cloud, it doesn't operate with the stuff that you still run on premises. You still have a lack of interoperability. Now, those of you who were around in the early days of the internet know that when you move from something like Novell NetWare onto TCP/IP, a lot of the stuff you left behind was still valuable. We're still in that sort of mode. Also, Kubernetes is still too complex. This gentleman down here and I were both at KubeCon 2 weeks ago, and you had the best and brightest minds in the world talking about everything Kubernetes, and not one of them had a simple, easy to go, here you go, the two-step plug-in solution to everything. So Kubernetes is getting better, but it's not there. The other thing is lack of examples of how other people are doing this. I've started writing a series on how to move something from a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, or Perl into Kubernetes, and trying to find examples of how other people have done that and explain to folks how the various pieces connect together is very, very hard. This is not long established procedures. It's still very early days, unfortunately. Also, Kubernetes, everyone's talking about it, but there's still not enough of solutions out there. It's hard to say, I want a big blue Kubernetes for this, I want a little green one over here for this one. There's not a lot of ready-made solutions. Now, the great thing about the survey I showed you earlier is people were asking, where are other people on the path to getting everything on Kubernetes? And the data shows that most organizations begin by moving the databases. Now, moving something that's supposed to be permanent into an ephemeral world kind of makes me nervous. I'm an old-time DBA. So as people start moving their databases to the cloud, they, of course, start doing analytics. You can automate a lot of the analytics today. And they start doing more and more complex workloads, and they're claiming they're doing AI and machine learning. Now, the data was kind of funny, is in this year's report, analytics jumped to the number 2 spot from number 6, and AI from number 3 to 7. And persistent storage dropped from 2 to 4. That kind of makes me nervous. Databases want persistent storage, and I'm wondering if these folks claiming they're doing analytics and artificial intelligence are just trying to make themselves feel a little bit better about what they're trying to do without actually doing it themselves. Now, getting your data to work on Kubernetes seems to be the first step that everyone needs to take. That's the hard part. Databases aren't designed to run in a Kubernetes type environment, so it's really rough to get them up there and get them solid. Now, the folks who are running database as a service or software as a service, the problems they're having is that you're still having to manage a lot of the database yourself no matter what your provider gives you. They might do the provisioning, they might do the backups, they might do all that, but there's a lot of work in the architectural field that you still have to do yourself. Now, once you get the data up there, managing everything is very hard. A lot of the tools you're used to, like PG dump, will not really work well in the cloud environment, so you have to rely on whatever your cloud vendor is giving you. If you're rolling your own cloud, you have to come up with something yourself. There's no good precedent there. According to the report, the number 1 challenge is automating application provisioning and management. Like I mentioned earlier, it's very hard still for a developer to get started on a project where he finds some sort of dashboard, clicks a couple boxes, get the database, the web server, the serverless information, set up the API, and have it all provisioned for them. Steps aren't there yet. And with that, I'd like to get your questions or your comments.
So is it possible to run databases on Kubernetes, finally?
Pardon?
Is it possible to run databases, DBMS?
You can. There are people running databases today in Kubernetes.
Yes. Is it possible?
Yes, it is possible.
Okay.
Does it work well? Not for everybody. It's like it's 1902 and we're trying to figure out which pedal should be the clutch pedal on the car. And then 100 years later, most people don't know where the clutch pedal is, so. Do we have anyone who's running a database in Kubernetes right now in the room? What are you using?
Cool.
Here, let's get her on the microphone, so. Yeah. So what are you using and how do you like it?
Actually, I don't have production databases because I'm a consultant. I'm a field CTO. But I've run Postgres under Kubernetes using the CNPG, the cloud native Postgres operator. And it works quite well. And it, well, I will talk about it in 2 hours, something like that. But I think there are pros and cons. And as I said, when I was a consultant, the answer to every question people ask me is, it depends.
Yeah. Now, how many folks in the room are database folks? Okay, we're the few, the proud, the brave. For those of you who aren't database folks, keeping a big set of data running across the globe in multiple installations is damn near impossible. Keeping 1 or 2 small databases flying is fairly easy. But when you get to big scale, I don't think anyone's doing it really right. You talk to the folks at Facebook, Uber, Twitter, if they're still employed. They will tell you trying to coordinate stuff all over the globe is very impossible. And then you throw in GDPR restrictions and FIFO instructions that we have in the US, it gets very messy. So. Any other comments, questions, or? Yes, sir.
What about performance? Is it worse? Is it better to run MySQL? What about performances? Is it worse, really worse, or is the impact using Kubernetes negligible?
Performance. Performance is sadly is what you pay for. If you go out and buy the low-end AWS database server, it will run fine. EC2 is great. If you have the money, go out and run the super duper Amazon Aurora, it will run better. Still not tuned right for your workload. I can guarantee you out of the box it's not. Performance is okay. Unfortunately, these days, what you need for performance is a credit card. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, when I started with computers, when you wanted more disk space, you had to go out to your boss who wrote out the capital requisition, who handed off the finance folks, who waited for the budget year to start, and this thing showed up about the size of this podium, and you bolted it in. And you probably got 20 gigabytes if you were real lucky. Nowadays, if you want more space or faster space, it's just a call and a credit card, which I find amazing. Now, is that always running right? No. Does it need to be configured? Yeah. Is performance okay? Yeah.
And should you change your application to write data SQL queries?
Yeah. The 2 big problems we see at Percona, and Percona is a company that does database performance tuning as a living. The 2 things we find out is that most programmers can't write decent SQL queries to save their lives. And number 2 is very few of them can actually define a schema to actually work well. So the 2 things that we run into are bad schemas on bad queries.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's what I see all the time. 99% of my performance problems are bad SQL queries and bad data model.
Yes. Now, if you go out to the websites like Stack Overflow, where people are asking database questions, and it's one of those things where I very rarely go out there these days because the programmers don't understand relational databases, they don't understand sets, they don't understand theories, and they want to reinvent the wheel. Like, how do I get an array type in MySQL since there's not an array type?
Yeah. What I see also is developers who learn to develop using an imperative programming language are control freaks. Mm-hmm. And so they can't let go and should explain what they want as a result, which is the way to program in SQL.
Yes.
And as SQL is Turing complete, normally you should be able to solve any programming problem with SQL.
Yeah.
If you have infinite time and paper, of course.
Well, SQL being a declarative language, I keep hitting that, It's like you call up and say, I want a pizza with extra cheese and pepperoni, where the imperative language, you say, okay, I have to go out and plow this field and plant wheat and then wait for it to grow and then turn that into dough. Meanwhile, I'm growing tomatoes over here and then put everything together. SQL is designed to go out and just grab armfuls of stuff and pull it back to you. Most developers don't understand that, and they want to get one line. They don't want to get the entire set of data. We have another arm back. Somewhere back here, I thought I saw one. Oh. Maybe an illusion, I'm sorry. Well, I only had 20 minutes, so I want to keep it short and sweet. It looks like I went a little too short and a little too sweet.
You're on time.
Any other database questions out there? Or? We have a row, most of a row here of database experts,
So why would you want to put a database on Kubernetes?
because that's what your boss is going to ask you.
That's the wrong answer.
Me personally, I like having my own servers where I can go over and do percussive maintenance on the box when it's not behaving right,
Okay, so why would we want to put databases in Kubernetes?
because your boss
That's
is,
not a, that's not a, okay, never mind.
well, the thing is, we're all creatures of our bosses. And if you could say, okay, we're going to run everything else on Kubernetes, but you want me to run database as a service for the back end of the database. To me, that's kind of an in-between process, because DBaaS is still kind of, cloud-based and there. Now, the great idea about Kubernetes is it's going to become the operating system of the cloud. So it's going to watch everything and run it for you automatically, and you don't have to worry about that. My age, I don't think I'm going to be around long enough to see that. We'll see. They've come a long way. Now, my basic recommendation is run your own database if you can. If you have to take it out to the cloud, do DBaaS. If you really have to run it with Kubernetes, you're kind of on new territory and it's kind of sketchy. But unfortunately, our bosses are driven by modes and fashion. Yeah, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.